something so I don't fidget.
Okay, fine. Let's go.
Oh, wait. I don't like that lighting.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Uncivil Law, where we learn through the misfortunes of others. And with us tonight is my guest, Stephanie. You will remember Stephanie from our prior firearms-related streams because she is, among other things, an EMT, and she's worked as an EMT for SWAT. So she has experience with firearms and has educated us all, including yours truly, because her knowledge is more extensive than mine. But her day job is actually as a corporate safety director. So she is relating to OSHA and doing that on the executive level for a company in the United States, her day job. And I brought her on today because we have, not so far in the Alec Baldwin story, talked about the workplace, right? We've talked about criminal liability. We've talked about civil liability from the perspective of suits over wrongful death, for example. But of course, this is a workplace. Workplaces have rules. These rules may not have been followed in some cases. So Stephanie will help educate us all on some of the rules that may not have been followed and potential liability. How are you doing, Stephanie?
I'm doing good. Long day at work. How are you?
Excellent. I'm having a good day. I was with Nick all day on stream doing Kyle Rittenhouse, day one of the trial. I'll probably post a short about that later, but it was interesting. It will be interesting to see how it develops. So, of course, the movie set is a place of work. It's a place where people go to do a job. And OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. They're a federal government agency. States have their equivalents in many cases because, as we know from many discussions, states can regulate more than the federal government. So in some cases, state law may do more than OSHA does. But OSHA is the national agency that does this, and they prescribe regulations for workplace safety. This would be things like wear hard hats in areas where things may drop onto your head, wear a high visibility jacket where people might run into you, install that guard railing so you don't fall off the ledge, and so forth and so on, including other stupid rules which are there because of stupid people. If you're asking yourself, why does this rule exist? Someone did a stupid thing one time, and now we have to rule for it because people are idiots, apparently. Would that be fair?
Yeah, the amount of creativity and ability to do stupid things at work never ceases to amaze me. I spend a lot of time going, what? Why did that seem like a good idea at the time? What part of this sounded like a good idea?
Yeah. Yeah, that's always the I mean, in many situations, it's more understandable than not. And some of it's like, why were you doing this thing that seems inherently stupid from any possible standpoint? But yeah. So what are the regulations as it relates to the on-set shooting by Alec Baldwin on the scene of Rust? What OSHA regulations are in play?
So ironically, OSHA does not have a specific regulation that governs movie sets and firearm use on a movie set. OSHA does have firearm regulations. We have regulations for violence and firearms in the workplace. But what always applies, regardless of the firearms, is the general duty clause. And as some people know and some people don't know, OSHA was formed because in 1970, the OSHA Act was signed into law. And with the OSHA Act, it gave general provisions, the best of which being 5A, which any OSHA person can quote you because, like some of those cases with law school, you say it over and over and over, and that is, it is the employer's responsibility to provide employees with a workplace free from reasonable and recognizable hazards. What people don't also get some days is there's a 5B, which says that employees have to follow the safety rules to uphold the safe workplace. So if you think you are going to be swift at work and get your employer in trouble because you're not going to follow the safety rule, and that when you get hurt, it's going to come back on the employer because they didn't give you a safe work environment, OSHA is going to come back and tell you that they're going to fine you individually $1,000.
Which makes perfect logical sense. Which makes perfect logical sense. If your employer is putting you at hazard, they obviously are in control of the workplace, and they should be making sure not to do that. But if you're a dipshit idiot who at the workplace is causing a hazard to other people, that's a little bit on you. So OSHA's going to come after your ass, in addition to whatever else they're going to do. Yes, they can individually cite. And you were saying how this could apply with respect to the COVID vaccine. So would you like to mention that just by an aside?
By an aside with the COVID vaccine, we're running into, especially in my workplace, if you don't work for a governmental agency and you're working for a private company in an at-will state, at-will employment, and as part of your at-will employment, you're not under an ironclad contract that says no policies and things can be changed while you're there that wouldn't retroactively apply. You're going to have to get the vaccine or follow whatever the rules are in regards to testing out. It hasn't been challenged in court yet, and it's been discussed ad nauseum that it's going to be challenged. But the problem people don't necessarily realize is while it's being challenged, it's still in effect. So it's not like a judge is going to be able to put a restraining order, TRO injunction to say you can't tell your employees to get vaccinated.
That seems unlikely.
It'll be fought out later down the road in most states.
Fair enough. So let's go ahead, finish your thought.
And in most states, especially at-will ones, I had this discussion with an employee today. They said, I'm not getting vaccinated, nor will I wear a mask. We have a mask mandate policy on property because of working environment conditions and things. And they told me that they had rights, they weren't wearing a mask. And my response to them is your rights end when you walk through my gate. You walk through my gate, you're subject to our policy. If you choose not to, then there's the door, goodbye, and I'll see you in court when you file for unemployment. And much to everybody's dismay, you don't get unemployment because it is considered that you effectively terminated yourself.
Yeah, it's for cause.
It was not an unjust termination.
Right.
So it's kind of the same thing. I don't want to follow this rule. If I don't follow this rule, when OSHA comes in, and OSHA's current legislation is they're going to fine employers $14,000 per employee that's not vaccinated or tested on their schedule, and they can stack the violations. So employers are like, okay, cool, I'm just not going to get vaccinated, and they're going to get billed $14,000. Yeah, that's great. You're going to get fined the same $1,000 and lose your job.
Yeah, very much so.
Game stupid prizes.
Yeah, you have rights, and so does the company. If the company wants to put pretty much any provision in, I mean, there's some laws, obviously, but this isn't one of them. So if they want to put a condition on employment that you must do X, then yeah, pretty much that's what we bargained for. But let's talk about the Rust situation specifically and how OSHA applies to this. Now, as you pointed out, OSHA and the OSHA Act itself do not separate movie studios. They have basically general industry, and then there's a couple specific ones, but movie studios fall under the general industry category. So all the OSHA stuff that's general can, in principle, apply to a movie studio. But what are the regulations that are most notable with respect to this incident, with respect to firearms handling, or with respect to use of firearms in the workplace, or checking firearms, and what are the ones that would be most notable?
So not to sound like you, because people have accused me of such, I'll give the it depends answer. It depends on where the movie's being filmed. Mm-hmm. Texas has very specific regulations about firearms on sets. Very specific. Down to the amount of liability insurance you have to hold, what the status of your prop guns are, what can and cannot be done. And that's a Texas thing. New Mexico, where this was filmed, doesn't actually have any of those rules. California does, New York, it's state dependent. But ultimately, under the OSHA General Duty Clause, you have to give them a safe and work environment, regardless. And the way we do things like that is through what we call a JSA, job safety analysis and job skills. And so I go through and I look at all aspects of the job and the process that you're going to be doing. And I say, here are the hazards, here are the potential hazards, and here's how we can mitigate. So one of the applicable things that applies is PPE, ironically. So under the OSHA PPE clause, it states that if there's things like projectiles, you have to have a shield, which is my understanding they did have some kind of shield near this camera, but she wasn't behind it from the reports I've seen. So that one does come into effect. You see that a lot on movies like Die Hard or with lots and lots of firearms, that even though they're all supposed to be firing blanks, a lot of the stunt doubles and actors are wearing a vest. And a lot of this came out of the Brandon Lee incident. And as many people know, because it's been brought up ad nauseum in discussing this, he was killed filming The Crow with a firearm. And what doesn't necessarily get brought up with that is that did change legislation for something called IATSE. IATSE is the trade and film union. IATSE does have very specific requirements for anything that uses union members and how you have to operate. And what IATSE says is you need to have a pre-shoot safety meeting. You have to use approved armorers. You have to go through everything. If a gun's being fired, it has to be declared as cold. You may not have live ammunition anywhere on set. You may not have live ammunition in the same vehicle that is transporting the prop gun and the prop blanks ammunition. And that every day you have to have a safety meeting and a safety brief with the safety team and the safety armorer. What's become evident through this case is that this was not a one-off.
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, people do need to understand blanks can still kill you, just like a bullet. Just like a beanbag gun, nothing is non-lethal. They're just less lethal.
All right, let me ask a question about blanks, because let me ask a question about blanks because I've never used one, so I honestly don't know. What when you fire a blank, what comes out of the cartridge of a blank?
Wadding.
Okay.
Generally, it depends on the gun, it depends on the caliber, it depends on the effect. But generally, what you're doing is it's almost like those snap caps you had as a kid.
Sure.
So there is a primer, and when the firing pin strikes, it makes a loud noise. But something that wadding that disintegrates and doesn't really go anywhere or comes out as almost a cotton ball.
Is that for like the kind of the muzzle flash kind of idea?
No projectile.
Yeah, because is the idea behind the wadding that you want something to come out of the gun so it looks like something is coming out of the gun? Is that the idea?
No, you need the wadding so that when the firing pin strikes, it holds the powder in the primer.
Okay. Yeah,
because otherwise the powder would just fall out.
Yeah, so there is some powder. So there's the cartridge itself, the primer. There's some powder, and the wadding which holds the powder in place. Okay, I understand.
In most cases.
Okay.
In most cases, some of the simunitions have very little powder, but they use a wax.
Okay.
Round, and the heat of the barrel gets rid of it. People like me are not particular fans of simunation because it is a royal pain to clean out of your barrel because it then looks like someone smeared crayon everywhere. So it depends, and it depends on what you're trying for. But technically, it can still be lethal. Things happen, and it's less lethal. There's nothing perfect with a firearm. There's no way to 100% mitigate things. There's just not.
Is it from the pressure of the air that would make it fatal if it was close enough to your body? or is the wadding carrying enough force behind it that can cause some sort of damage?
It could be either of those. It could be depending on the kind of simunition you're using or blank that you're using, how it's ejecting. If it's not a revolver, you can have catastrophic failure. I mean, people forget that when the round goes off, there's still all that pressure in the chamber.
Yep.
And one of the most common failures with blanks are stovepiping and double failure. So what happens is somebody who's not experienced tries to fire the blank, and because there was not adequate power or powder or whatever, or there was a fault in design or just a misfire, misfeed, instead of that round ejecting, it just gets moved up. Someone pulls the trigger again, fire the second blank, and it then launches the first blank case out of the end of the firearm.
Well, I'm not quite understanding, because normally in a stovepipe, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but a stovepipe is coming out of the port of the injection. It just doesn't make it all the way. So in a semi-automatic, you can't fire the gun if the barrel isn't where it's supposed to be. So if you hold back the barrel, the gun won't fire because it's not seated properly.
Right. When you're talking about blanks, you're referring to, most people just call it like the stovepipe issue, that it didn't have to eject. It didn't have enough power for the ejector to get rid of it. So it may have cycled back, but it's still in the barrel. And then you're firing another blank behind it, and then that's going to force your first blank out of the end of the gun.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand this, and maybe it's an issue of how certain firearms are made, because in the firearms, the semi-automatics that I have had experience with, which is not, all the semi-automatics, but, when you first load the round is basically flush with the end of the barrel. And then, and so there's an extractor that when you fire it, it uses the recoil to use the extractor to basically hold on to the what would you call it, the flare of the bullet. So you pull that back, and then you use the total momentum of the thing when the slide is coming back to basically eject it out the case. So I'm having a hard time understanding how you could have a stovepipe incident that would also allow the gun to be seated or a new bullet to be seated, unless the only way that this makes sense for me is if the cartridge of the round comes apart, so part of the cartridge is still left in the barrel. But that,
you can have part of the cartridge still left in the barrel. You can have not enough powder in the blank that it ever is enough for the ejector to actually eject it. And because there's no projectile in it, they can crush. The round, the case does not always stay intact because there's nothing in there. So a lot of people refer to it kind of as a stovepipe incident just because it's one right behind the other going after it.
Fair.
There's other ways to refer to it.
But basically you have part of the cartridge left in the barrel. So that part of the cartridge now becomes a slug.
And that becomes your projectile when you fire the second blank.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
So that you do get, that's one of the more common failures. Because if the person isn't adequately trained to make sure that there's just enough powder in that blank that it will eject, it's going to be in there. So
yeah, the fact that the cartridge is coming apart is
for sure eliminate anything. It's a CGI it and use special effects and dub over music, like sound. But people don't like to do it because it can sound fake.
In the Brandon Lee situation, if memory serves correctly, was it a live round that got trapped in the barrel, or was it part of a cartridge that got trapped in the barrel? I thought it was a live round that got trapped in the barrel. Yeah, so there was a live round that didn't exit the barrel for some reason. So it got stuck inside the barrel, which, you can eject the case because no problem. And because, the thing itself is holding back all the pressure for some reason, so you should be able to eject it no problem. And the next time you fire something with pressure behind it, there's a decent chance it will come out. So basically, you've turned your blank into a live round at that point. Fun.
And in the Brandon Lee situation, OSHA fined them $87,000.
Yeah.
It
And
was
as you
later
pointed,
argued down to 55, but the initial OSHA finding was an $87,000 fine, which, when it happened, was one of the higher fines that you would get.
And as you pointed out, since that incident, there have been changes in the industry and changes of the regulations. So can you describe any specific changes that have been made with respect to OSHA in this domain, in movie sets for firearms? Has there been, what specific regulations or other legal mandates have been promulgated specifically in this domain?
In 2005, OSHA fined Greystone TV and Film $650 after a crew member was shot. They had balloon breaking bird shot, and it was in the same box as the blank rounds for this rifle, which you can't have. You're not supposed to have them, and they got fined for it then. So you have that. The problem and the changes were, for IATSE, they weren't with OSHA.
Fair
OSHA
enough.
said this really isn't ours because as a federal entity, we can't blanket regulate how you handle firearms.
I don't see why not, but
here's
okay.
the thing that people kind of don't get with OSHA. When the OSHA Act was signed in, like you said, the powers that don't belong to the federal government that belong to the states, right? You can be a non-OSHA state, which is one of my least favorite phrases ever. Everyone's like, I don't care. We're not an OSHA state. That's great. You're just a state plan state that follows OSHA, which all it means in California is like the king of them. You must meet or exceed OSHA's guidelines.
Right.
And then when something happens, guess what? Yeah. We come in anyways. They turn the investigation over to us.
Yeah, this makes total logical sense. States don't have to go further than the federal government. So if they don't want to, they don't have to, but they still have to comply with the federal standards because of the Interstate Commerce Clause, which I have issues with. But we'll move on. But
what I'm saying is the states, the people that are like, well, I don't live in an OSHA state, all that means is your state's regulations are stricter than the federal OSHA one. That's all it means. They meet or exceed our guidelines. And we still are going to investigate.
So OSHA does have specific regulations beyond just 5A and 5B. They have more specific regulations for example, handrails, when they must exist, how high the thing has to be before handrail, and all those kinds of stuff, wear hard hats. So they do have a lot of specific regulations other than 5A, 5B. So I was curious if there are any specific regulations other than 5A, 5B that would apply to this particular situation.
Yeah, there's a few. When I'm saying 5A and 5B, they're just kind of the most known.
Sure.
They're the blanket ones.
Sure.
We do under OSHA regulate, like I said, PPE. So shielding for people, eye protection, ear protection. If you're going to be firing some munitions, you're required to do an audiometric study for decibels to decide if people need to be wearing hearing protection. If there's blinks, people need to be wearing eye protection. There's all of those regulations. What are you shooting into? You can't shoot in certain directions if people are within a certain area. There also are regulations involving hazardous materials. And that's where OSHA gets a lot of people in a lot of movie sets. Now, generally, like you said, there's general industry. OSHA's broken up into general industry, construction, maritime, and agriculture. So, in maritime, construction, and general industry, we all use explosives. I've used them at work personally. But OSHA has very specific regulations, and I believe I sent them to you, as to how much of the substance you can have on site, how it has to be stored, how it has to be labeled, what precautions need to be taken like you would with any hazardous material. And then you start running into the safe operations to protect your employees. So if I'm using something like tannerite that's regulated under OSHA, it tells me how far away everybody has to be before I set it off. Building implosions, you use a lot of explosives in demolition. So it says what your wicks, your time delays, the distance in shielding, what kind of rescue crews need to be on scene and on standby, what precautions you need to take to make sure that nobody has magically appeared inside the building that you're imploding without your knowledge. And all of those regulations, just like in the Brandon Lee issue, are where we start tacking on OSHA fines, even though we don't specifically regulate the firearm on set. But again, IATSE says these are all the things you have to do. And like I said, this wasn't an isolated incident, and this is where I, as an OSHA person, take exception. There had been, depending on who you talk to, 2 or 3 other misfires with a live round prior to this incident.
Negligent discharge would be better. Yeah, negligent discharges. Yeah.
Stupid. I mean, you can call it negligent discharge, but you're not supposed to have live rounds there anyway.
Yeah, so it's like, how did that happen 3 times?
Well, once this has happened, the crew, which is all IATSE, and I did speak to a friend who is in IATSE, he's a movie director, and he said they walked off. What happened is the morning of the shooting, the entire crew showed up, packed up their crap, and left because they said, and they made known to their employer, that they felt they were in an unsafe situation. And this is going to be where the other part that's going to pull OSHA in. If you are, as an employer, advised of an unsafe situation, it is your duty to abate it. What abatement did you do? 3 live rounds have been fired on the set. The crew is saying, I don't feel safe. The prop master, the firearms, someone sucks. You all suck. This has happened repeatedly. We don't feel safe. It's so bad that we are all walking off. And so, as a normal OSHA person or situation, you would shut everything down for a day and you do your root cause analysis and figure out where the problem is.
Yeah.
Instead, the production crew, being on a tight schedule, chose to bring in non-union people. So the firearms master, prop master, and armor were all non-IATSE union.
Now, here's something, because I was under the impression that it was against union rules to work with non-union people. Is that not a thing? I didn't know the two could mix.
I'm not a union expert.
Okay, yeah, I was.
Union.
If there's no union on site, if it's all non-union,
crew members were there.
Okay, so if it's all non-union, then none applies. Great. So it's all non-union, so it's not IATSE. Fine. Great. No problem. Although Alec Baldwin is presumably a member of the guild, so I'm curious how that works. Yeah, I'm just curious how a person who has his card can work on a non-union film. But he's acting as a producer. Maybe there's a loophole in there. Anyways, we're off topic. Where were we?
I don't do union. I don't do union stuff. Not my deal.
Okay.
But OSHA stays out of union stuff for the most part.
I would think so.
But here's the problem. You were brought a hazard. You didn't investigate and you didn't abate.
Right.
And it was so bad that all of your union members packed their shit and left. And you still did not find this problematic enough to stop things, shut it down, and reevaluate.
Yeah.
So now you're going to have abatement liability. So what happens with OSHA is anytime there is an injury that meets certain criteria, death, hospitalization, you lose an eye, there's a whole list. You have 8 hours to notify OSHA in some cases, and in some cases you get 24 hours to notify. And then the investigation has to be done. Once your investigation is done, it has to be in a week, generally 5 to 7 business days. you have to abate the hazards that were found. OSHA also does reserve the right to come in and do their own physical inspection. As you know, back in March, my facility had a very serious incident where an employee was stupid, and it was sheer stupidity, and they ended up paralyzed. We did our investigation, and OSHA did come back and say, we don't feel a need to come in and investigate. It was obvious what happened. It was an obvious human issue, not something we could have controlled. But we still had 14 days to abate the problem. I had to post notice. So where it happened on the property, it had to be posted in a giant form. And then I had to post it on every one of those bulletin boards by time clocks that tells you what your rights are and minimum wage.
Yeah.
It has to get posted everywhere. It has to be posted for a minimum of 14 days. And you have to post your abatement statement and the remediation that you've done. So all employees have the right to see it. You can't do it behind the curtain.
Yeah, that certainly makes logical sense, and there was no abatement that was done here. There's no investigation. When you have this happen, that provides you a specific notice. It provides you a specific knowledge of a duty to act. So you have a general duty anyway, and when you have this happen, then you're in a situation where you have to, take specific remedial steps, which obviously weren't done. And I've taken notice that everyone has blamed everyone else at this point, which, to be expected. The armorer is kind of not saying it's the assistant director's fault. The assistant director is saying it wasn't my fault because I don't handle guns. Alec Baldwin. I'm not sure why those two things went in my mind. Alec Baldwin is saying, was handed to me by someone who declared a cold gun. So basically everyone's trying to pass the buck. So do you have any sense from an OSHA perspective, which of these people, and I'm sure it could be more than one, but which of these people have liabilities for OSHA for their regulatory function?
All of them.
Yeah.
So what they're going to come back and say, and if I was doing what we call a COSHO inspection, which is the OSHA person that shows up to do your COSHO's inspection when something happens, or your walkthrough, we have different priorities for inspection. So if I come in and do this inspection, and I look at this, when you and I talked about this, I looked at it as if I was going to go in to do this inspection. And the first thing you do for any OSHA inspection is you have to have a pre-inspection conference. OSHA requires it. They're very formal. So you're going to sit down and we're going to talk the incident through and what happened, tell me what happened and everything. And then we start doing interviews. And then we're going to go look at documentation, video, any evidence. And then after that, we're going to have a closing meeting. After the closing meeting, we will go back and then we issue our fines or whatever. So the person that's investigating this is going to say, why was there no adequate guarding or personal protective equipment for these people? And the proof that there wasn't an appropriate personal protective equipment is he was shooting at her because she was setting up the shot, I guess, behind the camera. There was some Lexan, but not enough because it was interfering with the shot. But it went just below the collarbone, so using my medical knowledge, they probably caught the subclavian artery, through her and into the assistant director behind her. So where was our PPE? You can put anybody into a vest. It's not cumbersome or prohibitive for that situation. If something happens, you have PPE on. So why didn't you take that approach? Is going to get called out. Why were you, once the shot was set, when he was practicing drawing, why were you still standing there? You can put it on a monitor. Every YouTuber has a monitor that they look at, not the camera. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
YouTubers can handle it. I'm sure a professional movie studio can. Things run on electronics. So you're going to have that question. You're then going to run into the question in the inspection of, okay, but we had 3 other incidents like this. So I'm going to need you to make this make sense. And I'm going to need you to tell me how you investigated that and how those things happened. Make it make sense to me. Please,
Yeah.
what seemed like a good idea at the time about this? Nothing?
Yeah, that's
Cool.
because if you didn't do anything, it shows you didn't give a damn, which it goes to
Negligence.
yeah, it goes to negligence, and the fact it happens more than once pumps you up to recklessness, I think, pretty easily. It's like you have a duty, and
Willful endangerment.
Possible. Yeah, it's possible. For the manslaughter, it does look like that might be a possibility for involuntary manslaughter. I think that the question is, so the assistant director says it wasn't my responsibility to handle the gun. Okay, fine. Premise accepted. Whose responsibility was it? Presumably the armorer. Next logical question. Are they on scene? If the answer to that question is no, then how is the gun being handled? So it's like, because the assistant director handled it to you. So if it's not your responsibility, then why are you taking responsibility? You drew a responsibility upon yourself. Yeah. Where's the armorer? That's a really good question.
So it is my understanding from the reports I've read, and I have been able to see some of the preliminary OSHA questioning that's come out through our portals, that they were firing live ammunition out of the guns at lunch.
Yeah.
That we were having fun. And one of the things you're not supposed to do is take the prop guns and load real ammunition into it.
That does seem like a very bad plan. Yeah, that does seem like a bad plan if you're using
them together. So
yeah.
Why were we doing this? And it is my understanding, and I've seen some talk, and I think some of what she's saying may be clipped because a lot of it's coming through her legal counsel.
Yeah.
That it appears that she was there in the morning.
Uh-huh.
She did what she needed to do. She said the weapons were clear and cold, and then left. They did what they were doing at lunch. They returned the weapons to the table and declared them cold.
Yeah, so that seems like someone goofed.
You never. Yeah. But why did you take a cold weapon, make it hot, and then put it back?
Good question.
So once we figure out who was having fun in the desert, they're going to be liable too. And it's my understanding the assistant director was part of that group.
Yeah, I would think so. So if the reason that the armorer wasn't there was because they weren't supposed to be there from a position of what the assistant director was saying, it's like if it was her duty as explained to her to be there in the morning, clear it out, and we're good because we're going to make sure that they're safe throughout the day, then I think she probably fulfilled her duty. If the reason that gun is loaded, no, you disagree?
So under the IATSE rules and under all of the rules, yes, she has to do the safety meeting, but that was already raised that safety meetings were not being done when the union people were there. They sure were not being done, daily. She's saying, I did do a safety meeting. Now, I, as the safety person, have been the safety person on movie sets before. They may not want you right there, but you're in a trailer somewhere. You don't leave the set as long as there are firearms. So it is still on her to say after lunch, after they've been unattended for any period of time, to go back and recheck. You assume every gun is loaded.
Yeah, that's basic firearm safety number one. I was just trying to look at it from a more of a legal posture.
She's also, to my understanding, fairly young and fairly inexperienced.
Well, that's okay. I mean, I don't know how old you have to be to shove a rod down a barrel to make sure there's no obstruction, and to inspect the rounds to make sure that they are what they are supposed to be. So I don't know how much age or training you need.
The young and inexperienced part isn't so much a training as much as it's finding the fortitude to be able to stand up to a director and say, no, what we're not going to do is this.
This is a fair point.
And so when I say young and inexperienced, it's nothing to do with her age or her experience with a firearm. It's that, does she have it in her to stand up and say no? I tell everybody the only person hated more than HR in any company is the safety person. No one wants to see the OSHA person coming. Ask my employees. No one wants to see me because we're generally not there for good reasons. So why did she say that they were left unattended? Why is the armorer, did you let them put live ammunition into it and go screw off at lunch? No, lock them. You're responsible for them. Maintain responsibility for the weapons when they're out of your sight.
Yep.
If you're going to leave to go to lunch, then lock them up.
Yeah, she probably should have stood up, but from a strictly legal standpoint, does she have to do that if the assistant director, who's her boss, is telling her to go away? I think the answer is probably no, but she should have the tenacity to stand up and say, there's a reason you hired me and this is unsafe. So from a moral standpoint, yes. From a legal standpoint, I'm not so sure, because it's on the employer and the employee from OSHA 5A and 5B, right? So she's not the employer. Mm-hmm. She's the employee. Did she do anything? No, she didn't create a condition. And because specifically she was told not to by someone higher up. So that's a problem.
But here's the thing. Under OSHA, they don't care. So if I have an employee come to me and say, I don't feel safe doing this, my supervisor or boss has told me to do this. Mm-hmm. They say they're going to fire me if I don't do this and I don't feel safe. As the safety person, it is my job to walk out and tell everyone to shut up and say, this is what we're going to do. This is the policy. This is the procedure. This is how it's going to be safest for the employees. That is your job in any safety field. It's not the easy job. It's the job, in my case, to be the giant bitch to everybody when it comes to, I just want to do it. I'm going to do it that way. And why are you making me do this? Because I said so. Get over it.
Why am I making you do this? That's a good question. Let me show you this video from a prior incident that shows you exactly why I'm making you do this thing. That would be good. You just have the proverbial VHS tape to go. Why am I making you do that? Good question. Watch this video. Here's why I'm making you do that from this prior incident. That'd be good.
Right. But the thing is, when you're a safety officer for anything, first and foremost, your job is there to protect the employees. I say to everybody, my job is to make sure you go home in the same condition or better than you came to work in. I don't ever want someone to go home in a worse condition. I don't like calling girlfriends, wives, baby mamas, boyfriends to say meet us at the hospital. I don't like those calls. They're awkward and weird. And there are a lot of paperwork and a lot of work for me, as you can attest, to the many nights I've canceled things because I had to go do something for like 6 hours.
Because somebody's stupid. The stupid people are interfering with my time spent with you, which is very annoying. So the stupid people are impacting me personally. They're annoying.
Whatever. But what I'm saying, stupid people. Yeah. But what I'm saying is, as a part of the safety job, just like a criminal defense lawyer, is it the popular job? Is it the popular job as a criminal defense attorney to go question if a victim's lying? No, you look like an asshole, right?
Yep.
Okay, guess what? It's still your job. Same thing. You have to have it in you to step up and say, fine, if you don't want me there, I'm taking the guns and leaving, or I will come check them again and they don't get used until they've been signed off on again.
Yeah, the fact I'll go back to my trailer. The fact that they were using prop guns, which they must have, the fact they were using prop guns to go fire off some rounds at lunch raises so many questions. I also want to know if there was a range safety officer. I'm going to go with no, I'm going to go with there were just a bunch of people taking plink shots with no one in charge of any variety. So there's no RSO present. There's no one to check the guns as they're going back out of the shooting range. It's like, clear them as they're going out of the shooting range. And then when they go inside, clear them again. Because gun safety can be repetitive and methodical. Because the gun's always loaded. So you have to check and check and check. It's what's somewhat similar to hospitals. When you're in a hospital for a surgery, everyone who comes through, make sure it's the exact same thing. You get to ask the question like 8,000 times. Why are you here today? To make sure everyone is checking and rechecking, because accidents happen. So we're going to try to avoid that.
Right. And I mean, if you go look into OSHA, the 1910 subpart H, it's a hazmat subpart, standard 1910-109. It covers explosives and blasting agents. And one of the things it covers in that is, where's the exact wording? Class A explosives, black powder, blasting caps, detonating primers. So you have these things, and they talk about magazines for storage, motor vehicles, pyrotechnics, small arms ammunition. 1910-109-E13, small arms ammunition, which is the ammunition for any shotgun, rifle, pistol, or revolver cartridge, and cartridges for propellant-actuated power devices and industrial guns.
That would be like a nail gun, for example.
Yeah. The only thing that it excludes is military types.
Yeah.
Small arms ammunition primers are listed. So there are hazmat restrictions on these things, with general provisions, storage, how much you can have, and how you have to store them. So where was your hazmat storage? How did you have live rounds?
It was in a box labeled prop guns. That's our hazmat storage. That counts. The box.
Mm-hmm. So they're going to have a lot of problems with this. She's going to get nailed, unfortunately, because the buck stops with safety. It is your ultimate job. Baldwin could get nailed for not checking the gun. One of the big things IATSE came out with after the Brandon Lee shooting was everybody who handles the gun needs to check the gun.
And he's an IATSE.
As a cold gun is not sufficient.
Yeah. And he's an IATSE, right?
So yes, the IATSE people left, but screen actors should know. The director should know. So they're going to come after them. They're going to come after her. And the biggest problem anyone's going to have with this is they're going to get crucified on the fact that we had 3 negligent discharges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's going to be a problem.
On anyways, and now we had a fatality.
Yeah, it's. I once heard a defense lawyer. It might have been in a CLE. I can't remember where it came up, but it's basically, as a defense lawyer, you want me at max to the jury have to explain 1, maybe 2 things, right? It's like, this stupid thing happened. I'm your defense lawyer. It's like, I can explain that away. Okay, this other stupid thing happened. I can explain that away. But by the time you start getting to the third thing, the jury's thinking to themselves, this seems problematic. It's like, it can only explain away so much before the jury's going to stop caring. It's kind of the same thing here. It's like the first time, it's the second time, it's the third time. It just gets progressively worse. How is a defense lawyer for this situation, do you say, here's how I can explain away all 3 incidents in a way that makes coherent sense? Tough. Good luck.
That's going to be the hurdle they have to overcome, though. The hurdle they're going to really have to overcome for an inspection or action is going to be, it was bad enough that the entire union walked off. You were made aware. You were clearly made aware.
Yep.
And you did what about it?
Yep.
Nothing?
Yep.
You just found other people?
Yep.
Okay, so where was your hazard analysis? Where was your incident investigation? Where was the abatement? Where's your remediation? Where is your posting? Where is everything? Nowhere? Okay, you're negligent.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. And Alec Baldwin's attached as a director. So he's not just an actor.
A producer, I believe, not director.
Or a producer, whatever. But he's
Right.
going to get nailed, too, in that aspect of it.
Could be. It could be an honorific, but sometimes honorific comes with penalties.
Because you're just as responsible.
Yeah. Yeah, it could well be potentially. I think Alec Baldwin is probably in the best position legally. Not to say he's out of the clear, but I think between the assistant, it's a race in my mind between the assistant director and the safety person. I appreciate what you said and about the safety person being ultimately responsible, but I'm not 100% sure I agree in this situation, but it's close. I think it's a race between the assistant director and the safety person on who's more legally culpable. It's not going well for either one of them right now.
You know, and in your discussion that we've had about this, I'm actually going to put a little more on Alec Baldwin, too, in the regards of you had a director that said cold weapon, so
yeah.
Here's the thing, even if it was a cold weapon, your whole premise and explanation of this was, I was drawing this firearm to point at the camera, and the camera wasn't in the right place, so the director and photographer, and they were all over there, so that when I drew the gun, they could see if the shot was right.
Yeah.
In the words of the Marine Corps, keep your booger hook off the bang switch.
Yep.
Why was your finger on the trigger?
Excellent question. Excellent question. Why did you pull back the hammer?
So they can set up the shot.
Yeah. So
Why?
Tell
me how.
Yeah. Yeah, why'd you pull back the hammer? Why'd you pull the trigger on the single action revolver? Good. These are very good questions. And the camera wasn't even in the right spot anyway, so that makes it, I guess you can do this thing. You can do the square thing. It's like, okay, I got the square and I can see it in my mind. But yeah, it's I'm a little bit off, especially with the other things. It's questionable at best. But yeah, Alec Baldwin has responsibility here too. It's just the question is, could he? Well, especially with two other incidents on set, could he reasonably rely on the AD saying cold gun? That's a good question, especially with the armor and on set. Yeah, someone, if someone doesn't get charged out of this, I'm going to be a bit grumpy. This definitely feels like someone needs to get charged criminally.
My personal feeling is that regardless if somebody is charged, her husband and child are going to not have to worry financially for a very long time, if ever, because of what they're going to get out of it. And on top of it, you're already starting to see the rumblings that IATSE and all the different states can no longer continue to be the governing body for firearms, movie sets, and things, that OSHA now needs to step in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we are now going to see, because after the Brandon Lee incident, IATSE said, we don't want OSHA involved. We don't want that kind of oversight. We're going to put policies into procedures. And I think after this, you're going to see them saying, well, you're all a bunch of idiots. We can't trust what's happening or not happening.
Yeah,
If
and as
people leave, who did you grieve or notify?
Yeah.
That it was still going on? You knew this was happening. Did you say something? So now they're going to, I foresee there's going to be...
The reason specifically I'm getting a little bit grumpy is because of these other incidents on the same set that and the walkout related to safety. I know this is going to sound a little cold and callous, but if this had been the first incident and there hadn't been other safety issues, then you could make a different determination. But it's what I said earlier. It's like the defense lawyer. How many things can you explain away? So if it was the first thing, you're in a better position to say, you know, you're in a better position to say, this was just an accident and let's all move on with our lives. The reason I'm getting grumpier is because of the specific incidences that already happened that gave you the elevated knowledge to put you on a specific elevated duty of care. So the fact, if no one gets criminally charged out of this with that kind of fact pattern, it's like, why? And the answer, by the way, the chat pointed out, the answer could be everybody. This is not an either or situation. Everyone can win the prize. So everyone can win the prize. Everyone can be charged.
They all are.
Everyone can win the prize. So it's not necessarily an either or thing. It's just like who's leading the race, and also.
And you get in trouble, and you get in trouble, and you get in trouble. We all get in trouble.
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, and they may ultimately plead down to something lesser than involuntary manslaughter, but the idea that they wouldn't get charged at all is making me grumpy. So we'll find out how grumpy I'm going to be, I guess, as this develops. But I wouldn't expect to necessarily hear anything too soon because there's a lot of testimony to go through, a lot of people, and the prosecutor has to consider things. So you might not necessarily expect an indictment like tomorrow.
I don't think we can expect an indictment criminally or civilly. You can expect OSHA action within 21 days. We have a very definitive timeline.
It'd be interesting
Within
to see
21 days, we're going to see some response from OSHA.
It'd be nice to see what OSHA has to do because that will help inform other civil lawsuits, and OSHA's findings are, reliable, so they can help be used as part of any kind of case. They're basically an expert opinion. So it's like, it's just self-authenticated expert opinion. Here's what OSHA thinks from their expert standpoint. So helpful in a criminal case, helpful in a civil case. So yeah.
Like I said, Brandon Lee, $87,000.
Yeah. It's amazing that I say only. It's like only $87,000. I don't know what the right number is, but it seems cheap.
But here's the thing. You have to remember, when that was.
Yeah.
It was in the late 90s.
Sure.
For one. For two, OSHA is not necessarily punitive you suck damages. They're meant as a deterrent. And we cap OSHA damages. I can only stack your fines so high because once, let's say I have 20 employees that all don't get vaccinated, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You can't fine me $14,000 20 times.
Why not?
You can fine me $14,000 up until the cap, which then changes the class of violation and adjusts it. So, you can have 10 violations of this before it now becomes Group B.
Does the penalty go up or down? Does the penalty go up or down?
It depends. Again, lawyer, I spend too much time with you.
Not enough time.
So what we'll do is, I can go through a building and I could find 100 fire extinguishers, and they're generally like a $200 fine if there's an issue with the fire extinguisher. Once I get to $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, once I hit $10,000, it just rolls them into one giant violation. It's no longer a per item count.
That feels wrong. Why not just I don't know from a policy perspective why you would do that. You can, in a criminal case, you can charge someone with as many counts as there are. Yeah, Timothy McVeigh got charged with 146 murders, I think. It's like because there was about that many murders, right? So it's like there's no reason to just keep stacking the charges endlessly. Why not just stack them endlessly? That'd be good.
So what the reasoning on that is, OSHA has classes of violation. There's things like de minimis violations, willful violation. You have the different classes. And essentially, the best legal analogy I can give you is if you've committed 15 misdemeanors that are exactly the same, they bump it up to a felony or a higher level of misdemeanor. It goes from third degree to second degree because of how many you did.
Fair enough.
It goes from a first degree, it goes from a misdemeanor to a felony because it's your 46th offense, whatever.
That can happen, for example, for DUIs. And that would be a good example where in many states, the first X are misdemeanors, but after that becomes felonies. So that's one place.
That's the best analogy I can give you, that OSHA then changes the level of the fine.
Yeah.
Because it changes the severity.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So we'll see how it continues to develop. I think it's going to be an endlessly interesting story to see how it develops. And once we get the OSHA report, we'll for sure cover that and hopefully have you back on to break it down as well. Go ahead.
Yeah, my only worry with the OSHA report is I don't know if they're going to try to seal it initially.
Why would they?
If there's an active criminal investigation, you may be able to get a court injunction to seal some parts of it.
So you think that someone, not that OSHA would want to do it, but someone else would want to stop OSHA from releasing it?
Right. So OSHA could care less. OSHA really.
Yeah. Why would they care? They're within their own domain. Why would they care about what some state criminal case or some state civil case? Because they're a different body. Why would they care?
Right. So what my feeling or thought, and I've seen it happen before, is, we have an investigation and we're ready to issue a report, and an attorney general or someone steps in and says, I'm going to need you to seal that because there's information that could be prejudicial, or there are facts that are not yet public, we're not done with our investigation, and it'll taint our investigation. And they seal the OSHA report to protect their criminal investigation, not because OSHA gives a shit.
Okay.
And it's a fairly high hurdle. It's a fairly big argument to get done because OSHA's answer is everybody deserves to know. And as I tell people, you can go onto OSHA's website. It will list you all of the violations and all of the major class and felony violations. It's public record.
Yeah.
Of all the different violations in your state from different companies. They're public record.
Yeah. I suppose if it would interfere in some way with an ongoing criminal investigation, that's fine, but it's unclear how that would apply in this circumstance, because it's not like they're on the manhunt for somebody and releasing the report would somehow tip somebody off or something like that. It doesn't.
You're the lawyer, not me.
Yeah, well, fair enough. It's not eminently obvious how it would impact with the criminal investigation.
The one time I personally was involved where they sealed one of our reports involved a school mass violence event. And they did it to protect the minors involved because they're named. Because unlike in a criminal complaint, we don't list you as initials or does.
Sure.
They're listed out.
Okay.
And there was concern that the family and friends of the person that perpetrated the school violence event were going to take the things that OSHA found and find ways to destroy evidence, or find ways to justify why things that were there and use it as an end run to get information, if that makes sense.
I guess. I'm not sure at 100%. Go ahead.
They felt that essentially it was going to disclose some of the prosecutor's hand, and that they were going to go try to influence people or get rid of evidence or change something that was pointed out there.
Well, yeah,
temporarily.
Okay, fair enough. I would say that I don't know the degree to which you can say it would tip the prosecutor's hand, because they're not the prosecutor. So they're just coming up with their own conclusions, which if you're a competent defense attorney trying to speculate as to where, if you know the situation, you should be able to get somewhere close. You shouldn't be majorly surprised, I would hope. But it's like, here's the theory, here's what we found in terms of violations or problems that we discovered. It doesn't preclude the prosecutor from making other arguments, and to the extent that they provide any sort of defense for the defense, then that's good.
I mean, all I got was a letter that said, the OSHA investigation is done, your abatement and policies were approved, you are in the clear, but we're not going to issue the final report, nor will it be. If you want to see it, you may come see it and view it, but you can't have it. I can't give it to you. And once it's signed off on by a judge, we'll give it to you and it'll be made public.
Okay.
But until that point, you can see it, but not.
Yeah, just because I don't necessarily understand something on first instance doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't good reasons. It's just,
I didn't understand it on any instance because I know it didn't really apply to the whole situation, in my opinion. But whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not the lawyer. I'm just the dumb safety person. I'm the dumb person that argues, may and might with you.
Yeah. Fair enough. Well, I think that'll do us for tonight's stream. Tomorrow night, I think I'm going to do the whole women's health, the one that I was going to do tonight, unless I get enough energy to do it at some point later tonight. So maybe I'll do it tonight, depending on energy levels. And then Thursday, I'll do.
Tonight.
I'm sorry?
Everyone in the chat. I was talking to the chat, not you. Let's go. Egg them on. Tell them to do it tonight. Tell them to stop being lazy.
I did an 8-hour stream with Nick, I'm just going to say, so I'm not sure how lazy I was.
Nobody makes you drink with Nick, so I don't want to hear it.
I'm not sure how that makes me lazy, though.
Nobody forced you to do it. We want the content we want.
Okay, fair enough.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure is always a good motivator, I guess.
Uncivilian peer pressures.
Uncivilian peer pressure, that's fine. So we're going to split it up, though. There were two arguments on the first from the Supreme Court. Whole woman's health, which was the private people suing the other private people over SB 8, and then US versus Texas, which is the government fighting the government. So they raised different issues procedurally, logically. So I'm definitely not going to cram them into the same night because they're two disparate issues and we need the mental bandwidth. So we'll either do one tonight and one tomorrow, or we'll do one tomorrow and one Thursday to get those out, and that will be fun.
Do one tonight and one tomorrow, because I can't mod Thursday. I'm flying.
Okay. Good stuff. So stay tuned for that, as always, and I appreciate everyone's support, as always. The 169 of you who are watching, that's very good attendance. I appreciate you're here. Many nice compliments about you, Stephanie, in the chat I saw. People find you personable, charismatic, knowledgeable. There seems to be a generally positive consensus from what I saw.
I mean, in general, I'm still not a Romanian vampire, although you do have proof that even though you're a ginger, you're more tan than I am. So right? I need different lighting,
right?
Or that something.
Right.
No, you have proof that you're darker than I am in person.
Yes, very good. All right, so I'm going to sign off for now. I hope all is well. Till later, my friends. As always, cheers and goodbye.
Goodbye.